Well, regardless of your feelings on this episode, whether you're a video game player or just watch the TV show, at least we can all now bond together over the fact that we all get the Joel in one memes now. Hello, interwebs! I hope you are all doing well, because I am here to review the second episode of the second season of The Last of Us, in what I will suspect is going to be, if not the most controversial episode of the entire series, most definitely of this season, I am already sure. And I'm just going to put this right up front. I'm not going to spoil what I know from the game. However, I am going to be so curious to see what the predominant reaction is to this episode from people who did not know what happened in this episode was coming. And again, as I did last week, I am going to put my feelings on the episode as someone who has played the game at the end of the episode, and I will spend the predominant first half of this review just talking about the episode on its own terms. However, as someone who has played both the game and now seen the episode, I have wildly disparate feelings on both sides of that. As someone who has played the game, I have very strong feelings on how they chose to adapt this particular moment. If you know, you know. If you've seen the episode. And by the way, gonna go full spoilers in a minute for the episode. Not the game, but for the episode itself. I will go full spoilers in a second, so just know that right now. But as someone who is just taking this in as an episode on its own terms and going to try to separate out my feelings from the game as best I can, I have distinctly different feelings on the episode, and it's going to be hard for me to divorce those two things, which is why probably the second half of this review is going to be my most passionate, but I am just so curious to see how this is going to be taken by people who did not play the game, because it is just, there's distinct differences to this from the game, but this moment was obviously something that was big in the game as well. So I knew it was coming, but I'm curious to see how the different framing from the game affects people's interpretation of this sequence. So just putting that right up front, but let me just try and start, again, as best I can here, just focusing on the episode on its own terms, because on its own terms, this is actually pretty solid. Oh, gosh, there's so much to say. In terms of Abby, and we get the obvious awareness that Abby is after Joel in this episode, and clearly she wants to kill him. There's an interesting tension just built in throughout the whole episode. She's a character that is newly introduced here, so we have that whole sequence where she lands in the sort of pile of the infected, which was very cool. Like, I loved seeing them come out of the ground, and just a whole bunch of them going after was just effective in terms of the visual and the visual tension of it. But I'm curious, again, like, I know Abby from the game, so I kind of have a connection to her and feelings about her when I'm watching her go through this sequence of running away and trying to get away from the infected. And I have sort of mixed feelings, and I'm certain people watching the show will, because there'll be people who are like, oh, I don't want her to survive because I know she's going after Joel. And I think that that's an interesting sort of tension to reckon with, especially when she does encounter Joel, and you've now created this very interesting tension within the episode of, like, is Joel going to follow her? Is he going to go with her? And I really kind of enjoy that the tension that this episode has, which is, you know, is Joel ultimately going to wind up going with her, or is he going to get away? And I think that that's a fun tension to sort of play with. And even more, I almost wish that the episode, again, just taking it on its own terms, had played with it even more than it did. I feel like you could have ratcheted up that tension a little bit more so than the episode does. Again, as someone who played the game, I knew where this was going, but I think that there was an element where the show could have played up the tension of, since we know what her goal is and where she's going to take Joel to be, whether or not you get that moment or not. Like, I just think that that tension could have been more ratcheted up than it actually is, but it is an interesting one to play with within the episode itself. Other element of this, which is the infected going after Jackson, is also really effectively done. I really like how this opening of the episode builds Jackson up as something that is worth saving and worth protecting. Obviously, we've gotten little bits of Jackson last episode and a little bit last season, but this episode, I think, takes the pains to say, like, look at this. This is a community that cares for each other. Tommy giving that speech and him playing with the kids and telling them what to do. Getting Seth, I think is his name, to apologize apologize to Ellie, I thought was also really good, because it shows that like these people care about how Ellie feels, and they want to, and they know to call out bigotry when it comes up. And so it just feels nice that there's this like community of like, oh, we get the sense that there is a good community here, so that when it is attacked, there's a sense of loss and danger and stakes within the episode itself. And I really like that. I also really liked that when Ellie was sort of brought to Seth and Seth apologizes to her, she doesn't forgive him. And she even calls him out, being like, oh yeah, I'm like, you're saying sorry now, but like, you must have thought, she says it without saying, but you must have thought these things before this. Like, you must have had some level of bigotry that just doesn't slip out one night. Like, you clearly have bigoted views on queer people that you're stating in this moment. And so that you must have held that for a while. And so I like that she calls that out, and she does not forgive him, and no one forces her to forgive him. Like, I think there could have been a very easy scene of them being like, Ellie, you should forgive him now. He apologized. And I like that they don't do that. They force him to apologize because he's the asshole, but they don't force her to forgive him, which is the absolute. She doesn't know him shit. She doesn't have to forgive him for shit. And so I really, really liked that distinction that the episode makes. But also using that to showcase to us the community cares for her, and what this community means to the people that are in it, and how it cares for people. So just, again, that was really just a strong foundation to build up the big attack moment that we get with the clickers. And pretty much all of it was really solid, except for one moment with Tommy that bugged me, which was, you know, I love seeing them attacking. I love them throwing barrels on the clickers, the infected, blowing them up. And I even love seeing the big, I forget what they're called, but the big infected. I forget what they're called, the boomers or something like that. Whatever. The big infected guy coming and breaking through the wall and stomping through was all very fun and very effective. The only thing that bothered me is like when Tommy is running through the streets at the big guy and sort of drawing his attention. There's all these infected just running by him, and he's just going through. And I'm like, come on, not a single infected is going to come out and grab Tommy. Absolutely BS. No way. Do not buy that at all. That being said, the moment where he goes up against the big boomer and it stares him down and he has to take it down with the flamethrower was very effectively built up to, like, seeing it coming around the corner, seeing him menace at him was pretty cool. I just wish we had built up to it better, because I did not buy, that Tommy would not have gotten, like, sideswiped by an infected at any point, and also that he was able to, like, run into this corner and only the big infected would follow him there. It's just like you have all this chaos going on, and it's hard for me to buy that Tommy would be able to isolate it so clearly and definitively in that back sequence. So, like, the sequence in and of itself was really good. I just wish we had found a better way to get Tommy to face it in a one-on-one battle, because the escalation did not work for me. The rest of the escalation, though, was great. The building up of the dogs, everyone going down into the tunnels or into the basements, and all the building up. It's not the best siege sequence I've ever seen in my life, but it was all solid and escalated pretty nicely. And again, you get the sense of like, wow, we're losing Jackson, and you get the sense of like when Joel or Ellie are looking at it from the distance, seeing the fires raging, you're like, oh, I see why they want to get back there to protect everyone. I thought that was very nicely communicated, especially since we have some characters there that we do care about, namely Tommy and everyone. So like I thought all of that was well communicated. I'm curious to see what they're ultimately building with Ellie mentioning Eugene. We got a second reiteration in this episode of Eugene getting killed by Joel in a sort of dispassionate manner, and different characters have different feelings on that. Given obviously at the end of this episode, again, gonna just say it right now, Joel being dead, I'm curious how the Eugene moment's going to be played into the story. It feels like they're building up to something like that, whether it be a flashback to it or something else, because it's weird that they reiterated here. It might have just been a callback to like bring up the Fireflies again, and just sort of make the connection with the Fireflies that Ellie's had in her mind by seeing Eugene's sort of tags. But I'm just curious otherwise to see what that's going to be building to, if anything, or if they just reiterated here for that moment. We also get another reiteration here of the fact that the clickers are getting smarter, and obviously we see that from them insulating themselves and coming out from under the ground. So that was kind of cool. But I am curious to see like if we're going to get any more of the intelligent infected, if that's going to be built up any further, or if it was just for this, like, oh, they're coming to attack Jackson now. I would assume they're building up something more, especially since we get it reiterated here, and it's not too relevant other than they just sort of like buried underneath each other. But we'll see. I'm curious to see where that's going to go. Oh, I should say, the end song with Ashley Johnson, who is the person who played Ellie's mom in the first season of the show and also played Ellie in the game. She's singing the song at the end of the episode, which I thought was just a nice little touch. Okay, so now that I've talked about all of that stuff, I have to talk about the big moment. Joel finally kicks it. Again, I'm going to have opinions on this in the... in just a second based on my knowledge from the game. But taken on its own, I think it's decent, but it is one of those, like, she stops and explains her entire backstory to him, and we sort of, like, take this long, drawn-out moment. And I think, again, I wish it had been edited differently, where we see, like, Ellie trying to come and get him, and we sort of, like, have a better tension of, like, will she come and save him at the right moment? So it felt like it dragged a little bit because of that specific, like, tension there. However, it was effectively brutal. Like her pulling out the golf club and Joel saying, just shut the fuck up and do it already. And her saying, you don't get to rush this. Like, it was very effectively brutal in what it was doing. So yeah, it was a very rough sequence, and seeing Ellie show up too late and watching him die, it was very, very brutal. I will say it doesn't land as hard. I guess there's just... nothing against Pedro Pascal, because I adore Pedro Pascal, one of my favorite actors working right now. But I don't know, there was something a little not as raw in his performance. Again, I'm already starting to compare to the game a little bit, but it just didn't feel as raw a moment for me from Pedro as he did in the original. And I think that comes down to how brutalized his face was in that beat. And not to say that the Joel in the game wasn't brutalized either, but but Troy Baker, I think there was definitely a rawness to it that I think Joel in this, Pedro's performance in this, just felt like Joel was just sort of like beaten and done. And you get a little bit of him lifting his head when Ellie says, like, stand up, but or get up. But it didn't gut punch me as hard as the game. I'm already making the comparisons. That's unfortunate. But yeah, I don't know. And maybe it's just me from knowing this is coming. But yeah, it just didn't hit me as hard as the first time I watched it. But I'm curious to see how other people feel. That's a me thing. So I'm curious because I've already knew this was coming. There's an interesting thing though that I've noticed when I play things that from, like, when I watch, like, adaptations of something that I already like, and I know something that I'm going to emotionally just devastate me coming, how there's a part of me that still hopes that it won't happen. Like, oh, maybe this adaptation will make a different choice. They won't kill this character. They won't do this thing. You always have that moment of, like, maybe they'll make a different choice, and they don't. It's an interesting emotion to analyze. I've had that happen not just with this, but numerous different adaptations of things where it's like, you always kind of think in the back of your head, it's like, maybe they'll be different. Maybe they'll do something different here. Obviously they didn't, but certainly was one thing that I was sort of thinking there, and I've had that emotion before. Okay. All that said, I now have to jump over to my feelings on the game. So if you don't want, like, I'm not going to spoil necessarily stuff that's coming up in the game, but if you don't want any comparison to the game necessarily, or even potential for possible spoilers, this is where you should jump off. But I need to talk about my feelings about this as related to the game, because as an adaptation of the game, I thought this was so definitively weaker, especially because, and I talked a little bit about this last week, just based on the fact that we got to see Abby at the beginning of that episode, but, like, we get even more of Abby here, and I think the choice to just give us pretty much the entirety of Abby's motive, not just the entirety of Abby's motive is given to us here. All of it. Like, we get the opening, which is a little bit of, like, the opening sequence where we get the sort of dream of Abby and, like, her going to see her father's dead body. Like, at that point, you can kind of, you already basically know. And the explicit confirmation when she's talking to Joel is just icing on the cake to just make it very clear to audiences, which is it's just such a wild decision to me. Because, and I know some people have been arguing, like, maybe it makes sense for the TV show to frame it this way. And I know, even, I haven't listened to the official Last of Us podcast, but I know the creators talked about it there too, and, like, they thought that this was the better choice or whatever. But to me, it just reeks of trying to head off the backlash that they got from the game. and trying to like, oh, we're going to make Abby's motives much more legible and palatable so that we have people not get so viscerally upset at like this random person coming to kill Joel. And I get that. Again, I talked about this last week. I get where that impetus would come from. And you can certainly, I certainly can hear people saying like, "Lo, there's an artistic argument for it. It doesn't work as well as a TV show." I don't think so. I think you could have done this in a TV show. You would have had to do it in slightly different ways. In the game, you start playing as Abby, and you're sort of wondering, like, why am I playing as this girl? I don't know who she is all of a sudden, and then she runs into Joel, and then she kills Joel. So, like, there's a little bit more of, like, why am I playing as this person sort of question mark hanging over that whole bit. But I think you could still have done that in a maybe different form or different structure, but still earned that moment of, like, oh, this random person that we don't know anything about just killed Joel. What's that about? And I'm getting angry at her. And I think like having her sit here and explain her pain, like, yes, we do like Pedro Pascal. Yes, we do like Joel, but I think it lets it be legible in a way that I think undercuts what the ultimate story of the whole game and what the season is presumably going to do is doing. Ultimately, by giving us Abby's backstory up front, it makes her more sympathetic, which in most stories would actually be a good thing. You want your characters to be sympathetic. It makes them more interesting generally. But the point of this story was that she should not be you should not be sympathetic towards her. You should hate her. And then when the game later on forces you to identify with her, play her side of the story, and understand where she's coming from, then you are forced to understand her perspective after you've already spent half of a game wanting to kill her. And then you are forced to understand her by being in her perspective, and you understand how these cycles of violence continue, how people keep enacting it over and over again. And so when you get to the final end of the game, where Abby and Ellie are just beating the shit out of each other, and you're just like, this is just sad. It's exhausting and it's sad. Like the game just drags on for so long. And the reason it does that is because you're just like, it's just sad. It's very sad. And ultimately, like by having us have sympathy for Abby right up front, hey there, buddy, wherever Kipo is, my cat just came into view. It ultimately, just not to say that it's not effective, like the story can still, like you can still tell that story, and I think it will be effective. I just think it's less effective. Like there's a difference between it undercutting the story, which I think this framing does not undercut the story necessarily, but it does make it, to me, less effective in what it's trying to, the emotional journey that the game tried to take you on to teach you these things. And certainly that emotional journey is part of what got the game the backlash. Like, if you're going to have this character kill this guy that we ultimately have sympathy for, like, you're going to get back. There's going to be people who just will not have the media literacy to I don't even want to necessarily have there. Some did not have the media literacy, but like there's going to be people who are going to react emotionally, like have a very visceral emotional reaction to that, because that's what you're intending to. That's the intention, is to create that emotional visceral reaction. Some people put that off in very toxic, disgusting, misogynistic ways on the creators and the people who made the game and other folks as well. Like, yes, like did not wield it very correctly, but like that is the intent, right? And I feel like that was interesting. The backlash, the toxicity was not good, and I certainly understand wanting to try to hedge that off, but it was what made the story interesting, rather than just sort of traditional and a story that I've kind of seen before within a universe that I like, you know, the Last of Us universe. So it just ultimately kind of, I don't know, it just makes it less interesting. Also, the other thing that I should say too, in just comparison for the game, is Joel's death is just less shocking at this moment, regardless of whether you knew it was coming or not. Like in the game, because we don't get Abby giving a whole damn speech to Joel, like she grabs him, she brings him into the room, and then she just essentially starts beating the shit out of him all within like a minute or two. Like Joel just has a line of like, shut up and say whatever speech you have and then just do it already. Like he just goes for it. It's just much more quick and like, holy shit, what just happened? Whereas in the show, we have this long, drawn-out thing where Abby gives her whole backstory, and it, like, yes, we should get the sense that she was beating on him for a while, like we get in the game, but like, in just so the brutality of Abby, but like, it's less of a gut punch because you kind of see it building. in the show. And I think that undercuts it as well. The story's still functional. Like, it's not the story. I don't think it's like it completely undoes the message of the story, I should say. Like, I think the message is still there of like this like recurring cycle of violence. Like, Abby went and killed Joel, and now Ellie's gonna go and try and kill Abby, and like this whole cycle of violence just keeps going until everyone's dead. And so like that's still a legible theme and a legible narrative with this structure. But it is way less interesting and way less effective, I feel, than what the game is trying to say. Like, it just feels like it just... I've seen this story kind of before. Not even just that I've seen it in The Last of Us. Like, I've seen this whole, like, oh, you killed me, I'm going to kill you. We're back and forth of the cycle of violence. Like, I've seen that story before. And what made The Last of Us version of it interesting was its structure. It was doing something different. It was trying to make us, as the audience, feel the same anger that someone that gets caught up in this cycle would feel. And I think you had a perfect opportunity to do this with someone like Pedro Pascal, who's an actor who has such goodwill. Like, I think the reason that it works in the game is because we played as Joel. We understand Joel. We identified with Joel in a lot of ways. And maybe some people would have done differently than what Joel did at the end of the first game in terms of saving Ellie. There's a big, that's one of those main parts of the game where it's like, oh, I might have done differently than him. And there's a certain distanciation that you get from the game forcing you to do that. So yes, there's an element of it, but you at least at the end of the game, you understood where Joel was coming from, even if you didn't necessarily agree on what he was doing at the end of the game. And so we played as him, we understood him. So when he gets killed, there's a certain level of like our identification with him that makes us angry at someone taking that away from us, this character that we liked and we played as and we understood. And I think we have something very similar here in the show, based on like all of the stuff that you've given us more with Joel in the show versus the game, and also Pedro Pascal. I feel like while we don't necessarily directly identify with Joel as immediately, we do like Pedro Pascal, and certainly there are a lot of people that identify with Joel as well. And so I feel like it's a lost opportunity, and I just get disappointed with that. And I also... And I could have addressed this a little bit in my pregame stuff, but like, we don't get the sense of Ellie not being able to reconcile as much with him here because we don't have those like missed moments that we keep coming back to, and we get it all front loaded. I think one of the power of the structure of the game was we don't necessarily know why Joel and Ellie are on the outs, and we cut back to throughout the game these different moments. Even I think it's right after Joel's death, we get a cut back to a scene from episode 1 with like Joel like coming in for the guitar or whatever and teaching, like trying to talk to her about the guitar. That's here in the beginning of this part. It's like it was last week's episode now, and I think the structure of it from the game is even better on just that level because it goes from like Joel is dead to, oh, Ellie never talked to him. And that gets reiterated several times throughout the show or throughout the game, that now like we've already seen all those moments. And certainly there are a few other ones that probably will come up, I'm sure. So like obviously we're not done with like there's going to be flashback stuff with Joel, I'm sure, especially the big one that I think a lot of us are thinking of. So like there's going to be more. However, I feel like you just us front loading all of that stuff and not getting that here is like there's not that sense of immediate loss within the context of even this episode. We just like we get one of those like, oh, missed opportunities in the sense that like she wanted to go with him and he doesn't he already went out before her. I would even if the episode had just showed like Joel all waiting for her and then being like, no, I'm gonna go. But we don't. We just sort of like get told that he went out and he wanted to go with her, but he went out with Dina instead. And it's like, why wouldn't you visually show us that? Why wouldn't you show us like that moment of like Joel almost hanging out with her? Because it would have given us a little bit more anguish at the end. And it just feels like it undercuts that sense of like, oh, they almost got to reconcile before his death. It's like she doesn't get these moments. And yes, it is still there. It's still legible within the show, but it doesn't feel as structurally powerful. And I think that's ultimately my big thing. It's like this story still works. It's still on paper a functional story, and it's not like completely undone by the change in structure or giving us Abby's backstory right up front. But it just doesn't make it as emotionally raw as I think the game was able to do. And it just reads to me as response to the backlash. And I think the biggest sign for me of that, and I mentioned this last week, and I'll reiterate here, and then I'm just going to drop it because if I keep reiterating it, it's just going to be a whole thing, and there's obviously been other people discussing it, but it just even comes down to the depiction of Abby as a character. Nothing against the actress. The actress who's playing Abby is great. Like, she's doing a really, really good job, but it still bugs me that they cast a sort of smaller, more traditionally feminine-looking actress, when, like, the whole thing with Abby in the game is she bulked up to beat the shit out of Joel. It became part of her character, it became a reflection of her anger, and how it became so all-encompassing of her identity, to the point where, like, when she killed Joel, she doesn't have anything else, really, because she hasn't built anything else that we see when she goes back to Seattle. And here we don't get that sense just by her physicality as much. And again, no shade at the actress. And but I know, not my stuff to tell, but I know several people that were up for this role that did not get it, that would have fit that physicality build perfectly. And again, I don't know how close they were or anything, but, like, I know people that, like, tried out to get this part. That would have fit it. So who knows who they ended up, like, deciding between, but, like, certainly they could have found an actor. I guess long and short is they could have found an actor who fit the bill of a bulkier, like, character. Even if they had to CGI the few scenes of the flashback where she looked skinnier or younger, and then, like, the actor was bulked up more. There was ways they could have done it. I think they could have easily done it. And it just reads to me like not casting Abby that way is, again, a response to the very sexist, misogynistic backlash at Abby's character for her being, not traditionally feminine, for sort of having a more gender non-conforming appearance. And by the way, someone called me on the comments last week, is like, when I say gender non-conforming, certainly there's a gender identity that people identify as gender non-conforming. Certainly people can identify as a gender that way, as a gender identity. When I'm saying it, I'm not denying that. When I'm saying, I'm just saying, like, she is someone who does not conform to the standards of the gender role that we typically assign to that. So that's more what I mean by that, just as a descriptor rather than necessarily a gender identity label, even though gender nonconforming can be a gender label if you so choose, and that's totally legitimate and fine. So, yeah, it just feels like not casting Abby that way is a capitulation to that misogynistic backlash. And also there's an element of transphobia in there, because many people assume that, like, Abby was trans when she wasn't. But there's like a transvestigation BS nonsense with that. So, like, all of these things are interrelated and conflate with each other. But, like, the choice not to go that direction, I feel like just undercuts it, and it comes across as like, oh, they're trying to just hedge off all the backlash, and it feels kind of a little cowardly. And I think the structure of this kind of feels that way too. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe that wasn't their calculus that they were doing. Maybe it was a fully creative calculus that they chose to structure it this way. But I can't help but feel like there was an element of that. And while certainly understandable considering how toxic it was, just feels like it undercuts the story a little bit. Again, not even undercuts, just it makes it less powerful than the structure of the game. When I think the game, say what you will, whether you love it or hate it, I think it was something attempting to do something much more radical, whereas this is ending up doing something much more traditional. And to me, again, whether you think it worked or not for the game, makes it less interesting to me overall. I was much more interested in what the game was doing, even if ultimately people agreed or disagreed on whether it was effective or not. It was a wild swing, and I always appreciate wild swings than sort of more standard takes. And this feels kind of more standard take to me, and as a result, I'm sort of like less interested necessarily. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's not bad. Like, again, I'm watching this and I'm being very critical of this. I don't think it's bad. Like, I think this episode is effective. It does what it says on the tin, and it's interesting. And I certainly am excited to see some of the other stuff from the game that I really liked coming up in the show. But certainly I think this frame of the season and how it is distinct from the games just lands a little less strong. And that's ultimately everything I kind of have to say on it. I feel like these are going to be, maybe the show will make even more adaptational changes down the road that I'll have thoughts on, but I feel like this is just the core adaptational change of the season that's going to just frame all of it for me. So I just wanted to get it all out now, because if I get it all out now, I won't have to continue repeating myself down the line. I'm sure I'll bring it up in bits and pieces here and there, but like, that's my take on it. That's my feelings on the structure of this season. I just have to accept it as what it is, and we'll see how it goes from here. And certainly I'll make some points as it comes up, but at this point, it's like, it is what it is, and I'll have to go from here. So ultimately, I think where I come down on this is, despite all my discussions here, I think this is actually a solid episode. I think it works. I think the only negative for me is just really that it just doesn't hit as hard as the game. And I think that's unfortunate. But again, why I am so curious to see how people are going to react to this episode who have not played the game. Because I'm actually distinctly curious. Because maybe for them, without having that comparison in their mind that I was making the whole time, they'll be more drawn into it. And if that's the case, then maybe everything I'm saying is BS. But as a game player, it frames my perspective. So that's what I have to say. Also, all right, what did you think? If you have not played the game and still listened to my entire game rant, I still love to hear your thoughts down below. Beyond all of that, though, and anybody, please comment. But beyond all of that, I hope you, my friends, live long and prosper.